We are talking about infinity bottles. I've covered this very briefly in some shorts, so I'll probably link that up here if you just want to see a short format video of how to go about making an infinity bottle. But today we are talking long format infinity bottle, what you need to know about it. So let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Whiskey and Wine. Like I said, today we're talking about infinity bottles and what you need to know. So, for those of you who haven't seen the short format video but are curious, there are really two types of infinity bottles that I refer to. So, for most people, you're going to fall into one of these two camps when it comes to your infinity bottles. You're either going to be someone who has a personal blend, or you're going to be someone who has the true infinity bottle. Now, high level, the true infinity bottle, all that really means is you're just pouring whiskey in when you take whiskey out. It's an infinity bottle, it never runs out, it just keeps recycling itself. Or the personal blend, which is what a lot of people are trying to get into, is when you try to make a specific flavor profile of your whiskey and then you drain that bottle and then you recreate it. Drain it, recreate it. So you're going to fall into one of those two camps typically. Now, that's not the end all be all. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of other ways and methods, but for right now, those are going to be the two that we're going to talk about. So, for the true infinity bottle, that's where we're going to start. It's the most simplistic of everything. Really, all you're doing, like I said, is dumping in some whiskey into your decanter every time you take some out. So, if I were to pour some out of here, I would pour in more of something else, whatever I really feel like. If I want to kill off a bottle or if I just want to add something that I think would be good, that's going to be the true infinity bottle method. Now, you're going to see a lot of influencers right now, and a lot of people in general are doing this where they have either a larger blend bottle or a barrel, and they are taking that barrel or that bottle and they are dumping in full bottles of different things. They'll take a taste, they'll dump it in, and then at the very end, they're going to see how everything kind of marries together. You can definitely do that as well, but it is a little bit more haphazardous, I guess. It's definitely going to be a really cool experiment, but I do think they are playing with fire, to say the least. Not all of us can afford to dump out a 50, 60, $70 bottle of whiskey and not know if it's going to turn out to be something good or not. The easiest way to really get started with an infinity bottle is going to be just dumping in basically whatever bottles you want to kill off. So for me, there's some of these bottles that are back here, like this Penelope, for example, that doesn't really have that much left in there. There's maybe three-ish pours in here, and I'm just taking my time killing this off. What I would do if I had a true infinity bottle is take this, dump it in here, and then call it a good day. And that's what you can kind of do to start off your infinity bottle. You can just find some bottles you want to kill off, dump them in there, make some room on your shelf, and you can kind of just see how the flavors are going to evolve. But that's the one thing you need to remember with this. A true infinity bottle, the flavor is always going to change. You're never going to have the exact same flavor each time you add a whiskey. Either the ratios are going to be different or the different mash bills are going to change the flavor. The different styles of whiskey that go in there are going to change the flavor. So just be aware of that if you're going to do this true infinity bottle. One thing I would recommend doing would be just keep a log of what you're kind of putting in if you're gonna slowly build one up or if you're just gonna keep adding to it. Just kind of keep a running log because you might run into something where you're like, ooh, that tastes pretty good, and I kind of want to try to recreate that later. The recreation process is a lot easier if you have a log. And then the other thing that I would take into account is what whiskeys are you mixing? There are some people who are going to have a rule. I'm going to have this infinity bottle for my bourbons. This is for my ryes. This is for my scotches. This is for my single malts. This is for my blends, my finished whiskeys, and so on and so forth. You can really decide to do whatever you want. You don't have to follow any of these rules. That's the fun part with whiskey. You just get to have fun with it. You do you. It does not matter at the end of the day. But if you do want to follow those rules, just keep it in mind. This really only is an important rule if you're trying to make something nice or if you're really doing an experiment. But if you are someone who's trying to make something nice, I'd recommend just going with a personal blend aspect and trying that out. So, when I say personal blend, what do I mean? For me, a personal blend is going to be a specific blend that I've created that I think is going to taste good. So, depending on what you like, is going to depend on what you put in there. So, if you're going to make a personal blend, first I would consider what is your goal? Do you want a sweet whiskey? Do you want a spicy whiskey? Do you want a smoky whiskey? What is it that you want flavor profile wise? Whatever that basic flavor profile is, get a whiskey that already has some of those characteristics in it and use that as your base. Obviously, it's going to be pretty tricky to start with a big bottle like this. Start small scale. And what I mean by that is take some little dropper bottles, something like this little guy. It's my water dropper. But the nice thing about this is that it does have measurements on it. This specific one goes up to 1 milliliter. What I will do with this is I will take a couple different whiskeys that I think are going to fit the flavor profile that I want. I'll put them into some cups, and then I will slowly take different percentages of each of them, put it into my cup. Right away, I'll let it kind of marry. I'll smell it. I'll let it sit for a little bit longer. I'll smell it again. I'll taste it, and I'll see if it's going in the direction that I want it to go in. If it's not, I'll change some things. I'll either lower a ratio of something else or raise a ratio of something. And again, this is something that is fun to do. Don't take this too seriously. If you are having trouble making a blend that you like, remember that this is literally some people's professions to make blends. So if you're not doing it right, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. However, I will give you a couple of quick little tips that should help you along the way if you want to try to make a personal blend or just in general any infinity bottle. It should help you. So, tip number one, this is going to be to start small scale, like I mentioned. Don't automatically just go to dumping in some bottles in here if you're going to try to make a good personal blend. If you want to, be my guest. My recommendation, start small. Just have a little glass, use the droppers. And that leads to part two. You definitely want to keep track of what you're doing. If you're changing ratios, trying different things, you might not remember exactly what you put into a glass. So be a little scientific with it. Write down the ratios. Like I mentioned, the dropper bottle that I have has the exact milliliters on it. Tip number three is going to be determine your flavor. If you're someone who likes wheaters, pick a good wheated whiskey as your base. If you want something that's spicy or smoky or savory or finished, it's going to be super sweet or it's going to have some different aromatic to it, keep all of that in mind and pick a whiskey again as your base that's going to help you in that direction. If you kind of just go in trying to make a good whiskey, you have a very broad target and it's going to be very difficult to laser focus in on what you actually want. Tip number four, I kind of mentioned this in both segments talking about a true infinity bottle as well as a personal blend. This one, you can really take it or leave it, but that tip is going to be stick within the same category. This is really just for starters because if you go in and you're mixing single malts with bourbons, with ryes, with Japanese whiskey, you're going to end up with some very interesting flavor profiles. And it might not be what you want it to be. And it might be a lot harder than what you need it to be to start off. So keep it simple, start small, have a very specific target in mind, and stay within the same category. And keep track of everything that you put in, how much of it that you actually put in. You follow those four tips, and you're going to be on your way to making your own really good blend. All right. So I know this question is going to come up, and that question is what is a good blend to start with, or what is a good whiskey to start making? I can't answer that question for you. Everyone has different palates. Not everyone's going to like the same whiskey. Not everyone's going to have the same end goal in mind. But I will tell you this, a good base whiskey, to me, and I'm someone who typically likes a spicier whiskey. I really love my ryes, but you saw in the beginning, 1792, I think, is going to be a fantastic whiskey for starter. And the reason for that is this is a nice, well-rounded, balanced whiskey. It's not too aggressive in any direction, and I think it does form a very nice base. Again, this is if I'm going to be mixing bourbons, which obviously most of what I have is bourbon. So I usually stick with my bourbons. I like to start with 1792 as my base, and then I'll add in some other things. And if I want to go with something spicier, I'm going to go with something with a heavier rye mash. If I want something a little bit sweeter, I'm going to lean a little bit more towards those wheaters. So keep all of that in mind when it comes to figuring out what you want to do and how you want to do it. Infinity bottles can be a ton of fun. They don't have to be too serious. You don't have to overthink them, overcomplicate them. Keep it simple. Have fun with it. But as always, I hope you learned something. Hope you stick around. Cheers. If anyone's got like a good personal blend that they want to share, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Or if you're someone that wants to get into it and you're not really sure where to start, go ahead, shoot me a message over on Instagram or on TikTok. I'll be more than happy to answer it, or you can drop it in the comments. Someone will probably help you out as well. See you guys in the next one.